Good morning. Welcome to Unity of San Marcos. I'm Reverend Sondra von Gyllenband. I'm glad you've joined us today. And as we begin this service that's happening on the weekend of Memorial Day, I want to take a moment and remember those who have given their lives to our country. So if you would, please just call to mind all of those who have died in service, brave men and women. And we also honor those who have grieved as a result of these deaths. Amen. So Memorial Day began as Declaration Day right after the Civil War, and people went out and put wreaths on the different graves that they could find. And this continued, and as we experienced war, we continued to include the new service people who had given their lives as well. And eventually we changed it to Memorial Day. And I think it's important to take that moment of remembering. And I know for me, one of the very touching moments of Memorial Day is the placing the wreath on the tomb of the unknown soldier. So again, I just invite you to do your little remembrance there in honor of these people. What I do know is that many people have grieved at the loss of their loved ones, however that happened. We lose somebody and we miss them. And sometimes we don't know exactly how to respond, but we know that we are responding in different ways. We know that we feel different. We know that we're reacting to things differently. And sometimes we don't. But what I do know is this is called grief. Sometimes we know we're in the midst of grief and sometimes we don't. We just go along and things are different, but we have not a clue about grief. So I want to talk today about grief and the fact that we do grieve. The fact that we grieve as humans. And we don't only grieve death, but we also grieve change. We grieve the change of jobs, of divorce, of marriage. We grieve. We grieve when we sell a building. We grieve when we graduate from high school or college. So it may be things that we want, but we still find ourselves in change and still find ourselves grieving that change and wondering about it. So what is grief? Well, it seems that it is defined as the response to loss, particularly the loss of someone or some living thing that has died. And that living thing might be someone that we're particularly fond of, someone that we're close to, someplace that affection has been formed. But there's also grief in the physical change in the world, cognitive change, behavioral change, social change, cultural change, spiritual change, philosophical change. All of that can bring about grief. So who experiences grief? Well, everyone. Some are unaware of their grief and they go about life trying to figure out what's different. Some people are very aware of their change, and yet they still find themselves experiencing life a little different. So we grieve. When a person passes away, we grieve, even though we know from the time that we were born that we will release these heavenly bodies, these temples. We grieve for the passing of a loved one. Myrtle Fillmore talks about this transition of a person, and she says that the soul gives up the body temple. For some reason or another, it can no longer express through it or bring it into health. Your dear one has not gone away anywhere. He or she is abiding in the heart of God. And you have learned that God is omnipresent. So, all of us are in that heart of God. Whether we are functioning in the physical world or we have let go of the temporal world and moved on. She goes on to say that if your mother had gone away on a vacation and you knew that she was in loving hands, you would not be grieved or worried, would you? Well, now, that is just what has taken place. She is resting from her suffering and the problems that she did not know how to manage. She is in the presence of God just as you are. And the best way to show your love for her is to let go of the human longing and to let go of that sense of loss and celebrate that she is safe and secure. Your mother has just gone into a different schoolroom of life where the divine teacher is. Now, she writes this in her healing letters to somebody who's lost their mother and is upset about this, but it's so warming to recognize that we've just gone into another room, another classroom of the divine. So, here we are having this opportunity to look at grief. And just to lighten up for a moment, I just want to ask at this time of the year when, with all the rains, we're experiencing an influx of mosquitoes. If God created everything with a purpose, could you tell me? I mean, come on, God, mosquitoes? Yeah, been outside a lot lately, wondering about all those mosquitoes. Well, now I have a story for you. There was an old man who lived in a village, and he was one of those unfortunate people. Everything bad happened to him. The whole village tired of him because he was gloomy, he was constantly complaining, he was always in a bad mood. The longer he lived, the more vile he became. Everybody tried to stay away from him because they felt like his upset was contagious. It was insulting to be around him. He brought on unhappiness everywhere he went. And then something unusual happened. The man turned 80. He turned 80 years old, and he changed. The town people immediately knew it, and a rumor started around, and they said, the old man is happy. What's happened? The old man is happy. So they all got together going looking for the old man to find out exactly what had happened to this man. They found him and they said, what is it? Why are you suddenly in a good mood? And he said, well, it's like this. For 80 years, I have been chasing happiness, and I never found it. I figured on my 80th birthday, I would just give it up, let it go, and just live life. Well, what happened was he found happiness. He was no longer chasing after it. It just was, as he became true to himself. I think that's just a cute story of how we can be. But what I know about grief is that it can be an overwhelming emotion, and we don't always handle those emotions with the greatest of grace. There's been a lot of study on grief, how it affects us, what it looks like, why we have it, and what we should do with it. Well, first of all, I'm here to say, if you have grief, accept your grief, have your grief. Don't let anyone tell you what your grief should look like, or how it should go, or how long it should go, because you don't know. One of the people who studied grief quite a bit is Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and she says this. She said, learn to get in touch with the silence within yourself and know that everything in life has a purpose. So everything in life has a purpose. If we know ourselves, if we allow ourselves to get into what we're feeling and where we're feeling it, we begin this process. Kubler-Ross says that grief is a 5-stage process. And so we know that we grieve. We may grieve in stage 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, but probably not. Our process will probably jump around, move from one stage to another, take a little longer in one place than another, look different than your close friend or your brother. Things will look as they are as you go through grief. So one of the first stages is denial. And denial is that place, that time when we kind of take a break from even believing that it happens. It gives us a chance to absorb what's going on. But in denial, we may say that the person will be back. We may be in denial about a divorce or loss of a job and say that a loss of a job, we may say, oh, our boss can't live without us. They're going to rehire me. I need that job and they need me. We always find a way to deny when we're unable to process something yet, and that's all right. Another of the stages is anger. Oh, that anger. It can really do a number on us because as we become angry, we find ourselves being very active. You see that it allows us to move the emotions through us. We may blame, we may spend a lot of time blaming and arguing that this can't happen, that it shouldn't happen. So we recognize that anger is just a stage that we go through. And when we move through that anger, we might go to bargaining and we want to tell God, it can't be this way. We may feel vulnerable and helpless. There are moments of intense emotions there too. But it's not unlike us to talk about there's got to be a way. And if I only this or if only that, this can change. I've heard many people tell me, I promised God I would never again if they would only let this happen or that happen. Well, it's a way that we can move through some pain and grief. It's a line of defense against the emotions, but it certainly comes. It helps us postpone our sadness, our confusion, our hurt, but it doesn't take it away. We may say things like, well, if I'd only spent more time with this person, we wouldn't have divorced. Or if I'd only worked weekends or more hours, I wouldn't have lost my job. Well, that's bargaining, and that's one of the things that we do as we try to get through our grief. We also may go into a time of depression. Depression, unlike the activity of anger, may feel very quiet. We may lose energy. We may feel despondent, unwilling to go on, feel like life doesn't have a lot of meaning. We may be depressed that what we thought we wanted isn't everything that we thought it would be. We may find ourselves so sad, but it's important that we don't get stuck here. Because if we get stuck here, we're going to need some help, probably outside of ourselves to move through this. The last stage that we have is called acceptance. Again, it may come earlier versus later. We may go through acceptance after we've gone through denial. We may go through acceptance last. We may have acceptance and then come up with anger. So again, there's no right way or wrong way to go through these stages. Just know if you're experiencing grief, you will hit upon these stages. See, acceptance isn't necessarily a happy ending or an uplifting stage of grief. It's just a stage of grief that means you accept it, that you've come to understand it, that it means that your life is different now. I've heard so many people call it my new normal. Well, we have gone through a lot of change. We have gone through a lot of grief, or at least I have. I know when the pandemic hit, I found myself in grief. Things were no longer normal. Things were no longer the way I wanted them to be. I couldn't go out and do the things or go the places that I'd gone. I couldn't hug my grandchildren. There were a lot of changes during this pandemic that expressed with grief. So in acceptance, we come to a place that, okay, this is what's happening, and this is how I can best go on. The job was not for me. That's okay. The pandemic is the pandemic. I will wear my mask. I will get my vaccination. I will do what I must do to be able to move forward. This is my new normal. In the death of a loved one, you may begin to feel that you were fortunate to have them with you as long as you did, and that you have as many good memories. And those good memories may start to bubble up and just heal that place in your heart where you've missed them. And it doesn't mean that you won't miss them. And it doesn't mean that you won't grieve. And it doesn't mean that this will all become okay. In grief, one of the things we do is we begin to embrace it. We begin to make it a part of ourselves. It doesn't go away. We still have grief. We still have loss. We still grieve. So the reality is that you will grieve, that you won't get over it, but you will get through it. You will live through it. You will build a new life. You will find new ways to express. You will find that the ultimate lesson that all of us have to learn is unconditional love. And that includes not only others, but ourselves. So one of the things I would say about being in grief is that it's important to be gentle, to be very gentle with yourself in grief, knowing that it's going to look different ways and feel different ways, and some days will be great and other days you will find yourself hurting again and wondering why. But be gentle, be loving, watch yourself in response to the different things that are going on. Find yourself someone you can trust and talk to. Find some way. There's another story I want to share with you. There was a young girl who was blind, and she pretty much hated life because she hated being blind. She didn't feel like it was fair. She didn't like anyone around her. But this young man came into her life, and he loved her. Isn't that what we all want, is love? And he wanted to marry her. And she said, you know, if only I could see, I would marry you. But I'm blind, I can't marry you. If only I could see. If only. One day, someone came and donated eyes to her. And they did this quietly. She didn't know who it was. They didn't want her to know who it was. But they said, I want her to have my eyes so that she can see. And so she had her surgery. And lo and behold, she could see. And she met her boyfriend for the first time after being able to see. And she saw that he was blind. And she wasn't prepared for that. She wasn't prepared to see this man being blind. So she ended the relationship with him and said, I could never marry a blind man. The man was devastated. And he went away crying and hurt. And sometime later, she received a note that said, she received a note from him. And it said, take care of my eyes. Can you imagine? She got what she wanted, and yet she had a hard time accepting that. That's how we are as humans. We may want something very much, and yet still have the opportunity to learn to love ourselves right where we are with what we have. And that's what's important in this grief work, is that we love. It is the thing that is important for us to learn in this lifetime. Again, the ultimate lesson for all of us is to learn to love. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross says that in watching a peaceful death of a human being reminds us of a falling star, one of million lights in a vast sky that flares up for a brief moment, only to disappear into the endless night forever. So we have these moments that light us up, and it's important that we honor them, and that we love, and that we take care of ourselves. So the challenge here is, how are you going to do that? How are you going to lift yourself up? Well, you see, grief allows us spiritual growth. It calls us to grow spiritually, to be gentle with yourself, and as you grow in spirit. The challenge is how to be at peace in the middle of the transitional times, to stay open to the gifts that are offered and emerge with a bit more wisdom on the other side. It's Amy Fry's the author of How to Survive Life's Transition. I'll just share that again. The challenge is how to be at peace with those middle of the road transitional times, to stay open to the gifts that are offered, to emerge with a little more wisdom on the other side. We don't need to be afraid of grief. We need to be aware of grief. We need to allow ourselves to celebrate, to move into new awareness. And we can do that using our affirmations, our positive prayers. Remember that you don't have to walk alone. Remember to allow yourself the courage to be where you are when you are. Allow yourself the courage to acknowledge grief, to face the grief. Our ability to grow and evolve is directly proportional to the quality of our connections to our inner world and to other people. This is from Reverend Jesse Harrowit. In other words, our connections speed up our personal evolutionary process. Learn to ask yourself, how can I see this differently? How can I see this differently? When we discover the power of seeing things from a different viewpoint or of thinking differently, we become true co-creators of our thoughts and our lives. Allow Spirit to guide you. Allow yourself the opportunity to be present to this moment. Namaste. God bless you.